Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We are in the Billy Meyer case this evening, and I thought before I got started into the normal program, I'd give a little more of an overview and some more background information. Edward Albert Meyer is a 78-year-old man who lives in a tiny mountain village in Switzerland called Hinterschmid-Ruti. It's about 52 minutes east of Zurich by automobile. It's a very, very beautiful place. Billy's written something like 40 books and over 600 booklets that document his contacts with extraterrestrial humans. And what's so different about the Meyer case is that instead of just a few isolated contacts here and there that don't really tell you much information, what we have in the Meyer case is the answers to all the big questions in life. Who are we? Where do we come from? What's the purpose of our life? What are the other human civilizations in our galaxy like? Who built the ancient megalithic and monolithic structures all over the Earth? What happens after we die? What's the nature of our universe? So all these really big, incredible questions are answered not only by the contact notes, but by his specific writings. Billy's contacts started out with an extraterrestrial man named Svath back in 1945, who was a man from a race of extraterrestrials that called themselves the Lyran, even though most of the world knew them as Pleiadians. Even the Native Americans called them Pleiadians for centuries. But in 1995, they revealed their true identity just before they left the Earth. They left the Earth because of some event that would happen in our future that could have already occurred, I don't know, or maybe it hasn't occurred yet. It's hard to tell. But anyway, there were 2,862 extraterrestrial humans back on the Earth before 1995. They lived in bases in Switzerland, in North America, and in Asia. The bases in Switzerland had been here for something like three centuries. And we have bases in the North Atlantic with a group called the Hasters, and we also had a base in Mount Shasta I guess that's California. A group called the Hyperboreans lived in Mount Shasta, and I think they also left in 1995 as well. It's interesting because the Hyperboreans had been on the Earth for something like 130,000 years. So you can almost consider them at that time Earth peoples. They had been here so long. They were a blonde-haired people that lived within Mount Shasta. There was a small city there, about 700 of them. You could sometimes see their golden spherical colored ships leaving, I think it's the eastern slope of Mount Shasta. And sometimes they would also get ships coming in. They would get visitors. These Hyperboreans had some kind of beam weapons that would be used to temporarily paralyze Earth humans that had gotten too close to their base. They preferred not to intermingle with the native Earth people. One of the things that we learned from the Meyer case is that many of these extraterrestrials, because they're higher evolved than we are, their thought forms are different than ours, and to be in our presence is usually extremely disturbing to them because they can sense all of our negative thinking, our anger, our bitterness, our fear, our anxiety, our worry, our selfishness, all these things, they can sense. And literally they have to wear protective gear when they interact with Earth humanity. Now, Billy's a little different because of the age of his spirit form. According to Maya information, his spirit form is 9.6 billion years old. Now, to some people, excuse me, I have a cold this evening. I haven't had a cold in about 7 or 8 years, so this is a little different for me. Billy's spirit form is 9.6 billion years old. Now, to put that in perspective, our Earth is about 5 billion years old. And the Maya information explains that this spirit form that's in Billy Meyer, its first incarnation was named Nocodamian. And that Nocodamian taught not in our solar system, not in our galaxy, but in other galaxies in very, very ancient times. And the incarnations of the spirit into material lifetimes, it's typically would be a spiritual teacher or a prophet. On the earth, the spirit form has been Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad. Now, many of the people that I just mentioned had different names at the time. And that's another thing that I just have recently learned within the past couple of years myself. And we don't think of it that way, but these historical figures, their names have often been changed. Particularly the letter J actually did not exist in the ancient world. For example, the book of Job wasn't called the book of Job originally. It was the book of Iob. And the letter J was invented around 1550 by a man named Gian Giorgio Terracino, who was an Italian scholar who invented the letter J, but for the German language. It eventually got put into the French and then came to the English. So the original Gutenberg Bible, the very first printing of the King James, all of the biblical characters that began with the letter J, actually their names began with either an I or a Y. So there was this substitution that went on in history. So the Maya information is extremely, causes a lot of controversy, we'll say that. And Billy's first contact, Svath, explained and warned him that during his lifetime that he would have great pressure and people would try to kill him and his close friends would turn against him and that he would have a life of suffering. And one of the things that Svath did when Billy was in the ship, he put a device on his head that unlocked some of the abilities of his predecessor personalities. You see, we all have locked in our subconscious the abilities and the memories of our predecessor personalities. When the spirit form comes in to the body of a child at 21 days, it also brings in something called the consciousness block, as it's referred to in the Maya information. The consciousness block has the conscious mind, the unconscious mind, and the subconscious mind. And in our subconscious mind are the memories of our predecessor personalities. And they have to stay typically in the subconscious mind, because at our current level of evolution, we would have terrible confusion, being haunted by traumas from past lives. Can you imagine you lived a life 100 years ago and there was a great war and you watched friends and family slaughtered. Well, if you could remember that, or even if you watched not only your friends and family but your cherished pets, and you had to watch that memory, those kinds of really negative memories would stick with you. And every lifetime you would literally be plagued by that. So that's one of the reasons that the universal consciousness has given us the ability to forget. And that's such a blessing, because even in the current lifetime, there are things that have happened in all of our lives which are extremely, extremely painful. And it's good that we have the ability to forget those. We should, to a certain degree, try to forget those things, because the purpose of our life is consciousness evolution. And that what that means is it's the gathering of wisdom. So we're here on this earth to gather as much knowledge and information in the current lifetime as we can. And that will evolve our spirit form. You see, we live many, many lifetimes. The spirit form does. And each one of these lifetimes that we learn, that we evolve in, strengthens the spirit form, brings the spirit form knowledge. So that's the point of these reincarnations. Well, it's interesting that we live in an age that's changing extremely fast, and it's because of certain energies that come from the central sun of our solar system, or our galaxy. And I wanted to read to you just a little bit in Contact Report 7, since we kind of were going to talk about Atlantis and Lemuria a bit this evening. Contact Report 7, line 163. This is essential. That it is important for Earth beings to know that the Lyran visiting Earth feel that they have vested interests here, coming over from their own belligerent and often chaotic past, and perceiving yet another atomic devastation by scientists' new ascendancy, a legacy to us from their own history, and they seek to head it off if possible. In other words, they have tried to head off, stop us from destroying ourselves with nuclear weapons. And they go on to say here, further necessary knowledge regards a cosmic age, of which I have already spoken once. It treats the age of Aquarius, also called the Golden Age. In this respect, I must first explain the religious interpretations concerning this epoch are wrong. A certain irresponsible fanaticism treats this as the religiously proclaimed final days, which they are not. By no means is this new age a final time, because in truth it brings real life. The epoch enables everything to develop to highest potential, including spirit and according to providence. Now, it will take many centuries after entering this period to reach such advanced levels. So the Maya information explains that we're living in what's called the third millennium. And in the third millennium, our leaders will become megalomaniacal. They will work to gain control of everything, the power, the money, control the world. And in the Goblet of Truth, this group that tries to control everything, they call the Secret Dark Order. And unfortunately, the people of the earth will become obtuse and indolent, lazy, and they will not be able to resist this the way they should. Now, I'm seeing some indications that we may be a little better off, that we might be, to a degree, some of us waking up. And I'm seeing some indications now in the current presidential campaign that shows me that we might be able to throw off this secret dark order that's in control of things, because they seem to be no longer able to completely control the narrative. And I think that the mainstream media has been exposed for being dishonest and for working for the elite rather than working for the truth. So the Earth, even in these controversial times in which we live, is no stranger to controversy. Because about 130,000 years ago, a group of refugees came here from a place called Beta Centauri. Now, this is not the Beta Centauri in our space-time configuration, which I think is hundreds of light years from Earth, by the way. This is not to be confused with Alpha Centauri. This is Beta Centauri. And this is a Beta Centauri in another space-time configuration. That's another interesting thing to try to wrap your mind around, that not only do we have hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy and billions of galaxies in our universe, but all of these different galaxies have different space-time configurations, which you can think of as different dimensions. So you can imagine how challenging it would be to navigate through the universe with everything, all the planets and stars in motion, and all of these different space-time configurations as well. But there was a group that came to the Earth from Beta Centauri that was about 133,000 years ago, according to Contact Report 70. And there was a man named Atlant who came to the Earth. He was a man of obvious Lyrian descent. He had broad shoulders, pasty white skin, and he was a king of wisdom, an Ishwish. He had entered into what's called the fifth evolutionary step of humanity. There are 7 evolutionary steps that all humanity goes through. At the 5th stage, people will become kings of wisdom. And that's an interesting title, because the Meyer information explains that one of Billy's contacts, actually a couple of his contacts, are Ishwishes, kings of wisdom. Ptah, who is the leader of the Lyran mothership, he's the commander, and another man named Quetzal. And during the time of Billy's contacts, Quetzal earned this title. The Lyran actually have an exam, a test that you can take. But this man, Atlant, was a JHWH, a king of wisdom. And at that level of evolution, you have tremendous abilities in terms of you can do telekinesis and telepathy, and you have a great level of knowledge. Sometimes these Ishwishes are very spiritual people, depending on their area of focus of study, and sometimes they're not. Now, a woman who's an Ishwish is called an Ishrish. And Atlant's wife was an Ishrish. Her name was Kariatide. So these two settled on this island continent, which I believe was probably rather large, and somewhere between South America and Africa, and even Europe, depending on how large it really was at that time. And they built tremendous architecture on this continent, this island continent. And they also, in one of the contact notes somewhere, and actually it's right here, it's explained that they made this continent, they expanded it, and they made it more habitable. Anyway, one of Kariatide's cousins also came to the Earth, and her name, or his name, was Muras. and he built the gigantic city of Mu, which was, I believe, in the area now we call the Gobi Desert. I don't think it was a desert at that time. He also built Agartha Alpha and Agartha Beta, which were underground cities, and they were connected by a tunnel system. So, anyway, they constructed these cities very far apart because humans had become clever over the years, and they hoped for peace, and they hoped the great distance between the cities would ensure peace. And it did, actually. It worked for about 1,800 years, to be precise. However, there were scientists that were whipped up by power lust, and they tried to snatch control of these cities. However, the people turned against him, and they basically pushed him off the earth. It doesn't explain exactly what kind of conflict there was, but these scientists left the earth and they went back to Beta Centauri in space-time shifted regions of Beta Centauri. This was about 115,000 years ago. So in ancient times, there were very, very advanced civilizations on the earth. Well, so they had about 2,000 more years of peace. And then these malicious refugees came back again. They actually had done research, and they were able to expand their own lifespans for thousands of years, and they had more offspring. So they brought a large group of people back with them. And they were, it says here, they were spurred on through their inhuman hate, through research and knowledge obtained from it, and they drove up their life expectancy, as I have said. And they had a single wish, and they wanted to take over the earth, for which reason every individual was taught wicked intrigues, and they were instructed in the art of war. This was about 113,000 years ago. Now, the leader of this group was named Arus the Barbarian, and he was a king of wisdom. You can be a king of wisdom and be evil. Hard to imagine, but it's true. And he brought with him 200 high-grade scientists, and they were also sub-leaders. Now, in Contact Report 7, it explains that one of these sub-leaders was named Semjase, and that Semjase, excuse me, well, let me read it here. Semjase, the highest leader of the sub-leaders, mated with an Eva, a female human being who was still mostly human-like, and also rather beautiful in feature and form. And the Evas were the Earth peoples, the native Earth peoples, people who had been on Earth, were either part of the naturally evolving humans on Earth, or they had come to the Earth in ancient, even more ancient times, and died on Earth and become part of the reincarnational patterns. Anyway, this group that came from Beta Centauri, they didn't want to mix their genetics with the native Earth people. At least that was their official policy, not to do that. But Semjase, he violated that policy. And not only that, they were doing genetic engineering. And it says here, each according to his own race created mutated beings, completely new forms of life, who were of dwarf-like stature, gigantic, or animal-like. And I think it's in Contact Report 5, maybe, it describes some of these giants, really giants, 39 feet tall, if you can imagine. Anyway, Semjase, and he was the highest leader of the sub-leaders, was very advanced as a scientist, and he mated with his Eva. The offspring was called Adam. And the Meyer material explains this is the real story of Adam. I'll let you decide what you think is correct. In any case, this angered Ishwish Arus, who sees some of his sub-leaders when he could catch them and kill them or exile them. Eventually, Arus changed his mind about this and recognized this was a new power that he could exercise over the earth beings. In any case, Arus conquered a land in the north called Hyperborea. Okay, this was, at this time, about 113,000 years ago, the North Pole was an area of a constant, eternal summer. Not sure how. There may have been a mantle or a big cloud covering over the earth which held the heat in. And there was something about the environment up there which made it a perfect summer all the time. It never got below like 60 or 65 degrees. And they had all kinds of growing fruit trees. It was an amazingly beautiful place. And actually, the landmass of Florida was up there near the North Pole at this time. So the Earth was in a different alignment than it is now. In any case, Arus conquered the region of Hyperborea. And his son, Arus II, went to India, Pakistan, Persia, and he struck the forefathers of the Sumerians who were peace-loving, and they took over India, Pakistan, and Persia. Arus was named after, or Arus II was named after Arus, but today, India of today was called Aryan, because that was one of the names of Arus II, in any case. So this war went on after Arus and his son. Arus took over Hyperborea, his son took over India, Pakistan, and those areas. And it was about, for another 500 years, there were these skirmishes that went on. And then finally, the real war broke out. And I have that up on Exopolitics, Ohio.us. And if you look at the website and you go to under various and go to Contact 59, you'll see a very in-depth description of what happened here. And as far as I know, this is the only place on the web where you can look at Contact 59 if you're interested in it. But the war powers of Mu and Atlantis were of a horrible scale and a horrible, incredible force. The army of Atlantis alone had 4.83 million people, and they had very advanced beam ships, and they had these various kinds of ships which were made for 10 men. In any sense, they melted Mu to the ground. They had these beam weapons that were used on Mu, and they melted the city to the ground. But a few people got off, and some of the scientists went and got an asteroid and slammed it into the earth as revenge against the Atlanteans. Well, when this asteroid was brought back to the earth and caused this great destruction, it caused a pole shift. It caused the whole continent of Atlantis to sink under the Atlantic Ocean. It devastated the whole ecosystem of the earth. And, we were basically both of these great civilizations were wiped out, covered underwater, and the only records that we have that this civilization existed are the ancient megalithic and monolithic structures all over the earth, like the Great Pyramid of Giza, which we've studied before, and you realize that we really don't have the technology to build structures like that. So we're really not at the level of advancement that these two ancient cities were at 133,000 years ago. So, anyway, the hope is that we won't destroy ourselves as we did back in the time of Pelagon, which was before Atlantis and Lemuria, and how we destroyed ourselves back in the time of Atlantis and Lemuria. So how can we keep ourselves from completely destroying ourselves? Well, one of the ways that we can do that is learning to control our thinking, because controlling your thoughts is the key to controlling the circumstances in your life. And Billy has a great book. It's called The Might of Thoughts. And it was originally an article called The Voice of the Aquarian Age, and he kept expanding on it, and they ended up making it a book. It's a book I've read 3 times, and I probably need to read it a 4th time. And in the very beginning of the book, Elizabeth Moosberger writes, "So the book which lies before you is dedicated to a humankind that is ill in its consciousness, so that finds again the creational natural way which it lost long ago." And one of the first things we have to learn to do is thinking independently. Because the only way your consciousness can evolve is that you have to step outside of being influenced so much by the television, the radio, the newspapers, the magazines, and the books. And because people are so influenced by the mainstream media, they cannot think independently. And if you cannot think independently, the whole purpose for your life is being undermined. Because evolution requires that you think independently. For example, if you think logically, you're thinking independently. Now, the Meyer information explains, or it argues, that there is a book called The Talmud of Emmanuel. And it's a very controversial book. And it explains to be the basis for the New Testament. And that the Meyer information says that the New Testament is a kind of a fictionalized version of the life of a man who really lived. And this man's name was Emmanuel. And Emmanuel had a lot of teachings that helped people to think independently and to use logic. And that's one of the reasons why they went supposedly and changed the New Testament and took out these areas where Emmanuel was teaching through logic, and he was teaching people to think independently. And one of Billy's second contact was a woman named Ascot. And one of the things that Ascot told Billy is that the human here on Earth is still not capable of coping with and fully understanding the truth. And he is not yet mature enough to know his future and to approach it correctly. And for that reason, the truth must be rewritten prophetically for him, as in equations, in order to make him think independently, whereby he slowly finds and recognizes the truth for himself. And it's one of the things that I'm looking at right now is this huge immigration problem in Europe. And in Contact 215, it explains that Europe will be conquered by evil powers. And we're seeing the flood in Germany, for example, of 1 million Islamic immigrants into Germany. And Merkel, the leader of Germany, has allowed this to happen. And there will probably be, or there could very well be, a civil war in Germany. And the same kind of thing is happening in Sweden. And I believe the Meyer material actually has a prophecy about a civil war, not only in Russia, in Sweden, and potentially 2 civil wars in the U.S. Now, how do we prevent all these disasters? By learning to think independently and learning to control our thoughts. Because our consciousness is like a garden. And the goal here is to think in neutral, positive thoughts. Because the universal consciousness is a neutral, positive being. It's always neutral, positive. It always thinks in balanced, harmonious terms. And in fact, your spirit form is a little part piece of this universal consciousness. You have a spiritual consciousness and you have a material consciousness. Your spiritual consciousness never dies. It never sleeps. It's never harmed by anything in the physical world. It cannot have a breakdown. So this should be very comforting to you. Your spirit form came into your body when you were 21 days old, still in the womb of your mother. With it came the mentality, your overall consciousness block, with your conscious mind, your subconscious mind, and your unconscious mind. And I talked earlier about how the memories of your predecessor personalities are locked in your subconscious. So we need to learn to control our thoughts and to clarify our thoughts so that they become more valuable and more purposeful and more productive. And our life, our thinking, will become more harmonious because the universal consciousness is also a neutral, positive entity. And everything in nature is designed to stay in this neutral, positive balance. So we need to clarify our thoughts. We need to make effort to do that. We need to practice clarifying our thoughts. And we need to learn patience. And that will lead to a harmonious life. To clarify means to make things less confused and more comprehensible. So what we're trying to do here is to take away ambiguity and confusion and to clarify our thinking. You know, our consciousness is like a garden, and if it is not correctly maintained, there will be wildly growing negative thoughts which have a confusing and destructive effect. So how do you tell if you're having a negative thought? Well, if you have a thought that produces confusion, it's probably negative. Is this thought having a destructive effect on your life? Do you have negative feelings from these thoughts? Then you need to try to eliminate these thoughts. Or you'll have many more wildly growing thoughts which are like destructive weeds that can pop up in your garden of your consciousness, and they can become animated, and they can develop their own life, exactly as plants. So you can have negative repeating thoughts. And what happens is people can only think in terms of these negative repeating thoughts that appear over and over and over again. And one of the things that you can do to stop the cycle of negative repeating thoughts is to learn to have a wishful dream, something that you think about, something that is occurring right now, like watching your pets play, or laying outside on a warm, sunny day, like today, and seeing the trees and listening to the birds sing. You see, these kind of thoughts you need to nurture. Those are kind of thoughts that you need to hold on to And that will reproduce the harmonious status of your psyche. And when you can do that, and when you can learn that skill, you can stop the repeating thoughts that can lead to insanity. These thoughts can lead to delusion, psychic disorder, or psychic illness. So you need to practice self-examination and self-control. Self-cognition is the ability to know yourself. That which the human being thinks, he makes real. Good and positive thoughts must be tended and nurtured. The human being should have a good, positive opinion of himself as well. So again, we need to nurture these neutral, positive thoughts. You are the person that's in control of your life. You're the master of your own destiny. And good thoughts lead to good feelings. Good feelings will lead to good habits. And good habits lead to good circumstances in your life. So these thinking skills are very important for success, because the human being attracts that which he/she is. In fact, correct thinking and knowledge is such a monstrous power that is able to ceaselessly attract and bring into being everything that the human thinks and longs for. So if you think a thought, steer that thought in the direction that's healthy. That will lead to inner freedom and to good circumstances in your life. I want to talk a little bit about the mind, because the mind has a spiritual component as well as a physical. And my information refers to something called the psyche, which is a half-material block. It's part of your material consciousness. It controls the thoughts and the feelings of the material consciousness. You have a material consciousness. It will die someday. You have a spiritual consciousness. It will not die. Your material consciousness, though, is not lost. The information of value will be stored in the spirit form. It will come back in your subconsciousness as the memories of your predecessor personalities. When you die, the spirit form leaves the body and it goes into the spiritual realm, this other dimension, and it processes the consciousness from the previous life. The Maya information refers to the consciousness as the consciousness block. This consciousness block goes into something called the overall consciousness block. And all of the experiences and the thoughts that you had from that previous life are processed over years and years and years. And everything that has value for evolution is turned into this neutral positive energy and stored in the spirit form and strengthens that spirit form. So each lifetime where you have evolution, you strengthen the spirit form and it becomes wiser. You see, wisdom is a kind of knowledge that produces energy. And we help the whole creation to evolve when we produce the energy of wisdom. And the Maya information explains that wisdom and love go together, and that the creation and its laws are wisdom and love at the same time. The creation is the universal consciousness. They don't use the term God because our religions have gone so far astray, so far from the truth of what really goes on, how the universal consciousness really is. what it's like. It's more impartial. It's not good or evil. It produces spirit forms as a part of its own evolution. Your spirit form is a part piece of the universal consciousness. And you will live millions of material lifetimes. And your spirit form becomes strengthened every lifetime that you evolve consciously. And there are 7 steps of evolution that humanity goes through. Now, most people on the earth right now are at stage 2, which is rational life. Some people are starting to move into intelligent life. But generally, as a society, we're not there yet. Above that is real life, stage 4, life and creational wisdom, which is the Ish-wishes that we were reading about before, learning about before. The Ish-wishes of the past, and those societies that destroyed themselves still, even though they were that high of an evolution, they still destroyed themselves. And how did they destroy themselves? They destroyed themselves through wrong thinking. That's how important our thinking is, learning to control our thoughts. Anyway, we have the spiritual consciousness and the material consciousness. The spiritual consciousness is controlled by a block and effector called the Gemut. The Gemut controls the thoughts and the feelings of the spiritual consciousness. The Gemut also supplies the psyche with power from these swinging waves, they're called. And these swinging waves come from the realm of cosmo-electromagnetic life. Somewhere in the universe, there's a tremendous source of power that our Gemut can tap into. And these swinging waves, you can see how they're used in nature. Many times, the way flocks of birds move, they have this invisible swinging wave. I think that's part of the connection there, the way they can turn on a dime and move together. The same with the fish. You see, there is a collective subconscious, even with humanity. We are all connected subconsciously in a way that we really don't understand just yet. The Gemut is very, very interesting part of our existence. One of the books that I'm reading now, and I'm almost done with it, I can't believe it, I've just barely scratched the surface of what it's about. I'll have to go through it again. Here on page 436 is something very thought-provoking. Can't tell you exactly what it means, but I think you'll get the gist of it. It says here, let me step back just a little bit. This will make more sense. Once the human being, himself or herself, puts himself into a mutual relationship with everything and anything which exists in the universe, then even the tiniest feelings and fine spiritual perceptions, as well as thoughts, words, and deeds, create real consequences which extend throughout the universe. Even the wing beat of a butterfly is able to trigger a tremendous storm because its movements are so enormously important, as are the human being's thoughts, fine spiritual perceptions, words, and deeds. Everything is inextricably interwoven across the entire universe. The result of which is that the human being himself/herself is really responsible for everything and anything of his or her thinking, deeds, fine spiritual perceptions, and feelings, and also bears the co-responsibility for all universal events, as well as for the thinking, acting, feeling, and fine spiritual perception of every fellow human being. Therefore, the human being is responsible for himself/herself in every regard. However, also for every other human being and for everything else in the entire universe. Wow. I didn't realize we had that much responsibility. And I'm not sure exactly how to parse all of that yet. But that just shows you that we do have a collective subconscious, and we are linked to everything. And that all of life is like a web. All of life is. This book has some very profound things to say about meditation, about life and death. It also talks it talks about something called the false identity. This is another new concept for me that I don't completely have my mind wrapped around yet. It says all of the I's inhibitings attempt to sabotage the way of evolution are senseless and negating in spite of all the efforts. This I is the false identity that he talks about. However, hope, fear, and anxiety are the greatest enemies of inner peace, as well as the real self-cognition and self-realization. But the false identity in the self-created I, through which the essential inner and creation-given I is opposed in the greatest part of its inner nature. So evidently we have this self-created I that's in opposition to our real inner identity, the creation-given I, and the two are in opposition. But the false identity is the self-created I, through which the essential inner and creation-given I is opposed in the greatest part of its inner nature, for which reason it cannot become free without one making a conscious effort for that. And as long as that does not happen, the self-created I dictatorially holds prisoner the real inner I and the consciousness. The real inner I is the prisoner of the self-created I. So we have these two identities, and they're evidently kind of at war with each other. The creational I and the self-created I. And the self-created I is a tyrant, and he holds the real you, the creational I, prisoner. The practice of meditation is the best way to achieve this freedom from the wrong I, the inner created I, from the grasping of the self-created I. Amazing book. It talks about death and preparation for death and understanding death, and that before we die, that we go into something called the death throes, and what happens there is that we do see visions. These really aren't real, but they're a way that the spirit form kind of prepares the mentality for death. I'll read a little bit here. The human being begins to free himself/herself by means of the material consciousness from the material reality, and loses himself in realms of the consciousness which, with few exceptions, only know the harmonious, loving, and peaceful. Consequently, fantasy images arise. So the images themselves are not necessarily real, but the consciousness, the spiritual consciousness that's harmonious, loving, and peaceful is. However, truthfully, these pictures are only products of the subconsciousness. which allows intuitions pertaining to the peace, the love, the harmony of the truthfully inner and innermost personality. And that's how the innermost personality kind of awakens, and it makes things appear pictorially. The death throes there emerge peaceful and loving as well as harmonious picture experiences on the one hand that take the human being's anxiety about death away. So this is just a natural thing which occurs. We really shouldn't overemphasize the actual images and pictures themselves, but we should understand that they're part of the preparation for the afterworld, the afterlife. So death is just a normal, natural thing. You've done it before, believe it or not. You've done it millions of times before. The spirit form comes out of the body, takes the consciousness with it. It goes into the spiritual realm. Your consciousness goes into the overall consciousness block, where it's processed step by step. All the memories of your life, all the experiences, those experiences, what you learned that are valuable for your evolution, are stored in a neutral positive form and become a strengthening to the spirit form, and the memories of the predecessor personalities move into the subconscious of the new consciousness that's created before you're born again. And this process can go on for quite some time. It typically takes longer than your lifetime. So if you lived 100 years, it could take as many as 150 years to process all the information from your consciousness. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the show. Appreciate all the people that have been listening to the archives. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Have a great evening.